Hello readers by eyes and by ears, this is Mari Chan and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we are continuing with the reading of The Disabled Tyrant's Beloved Pet Fish, also known as 残疾暴君的掌心鱼宠 by Xue Shan Fei Hu. We're covering chapters 9 through 12, so I hope you all enjoy. Chapter 9, The Fish is Belly Up. In the face of Prince Jing's clear indifference, the emperor felt a little awkward. Fifth brother, the royal father is asking you a question, Mu Tianzhao reminded him, with what might have been a smile. The second prince had always been a little wary of Prince Jing because of the difference in their statuses. Now that he was about to become the crown prince, though, he was going to take that all back. Prince Jing looked up, but not to acknowledge the second prince. Instead, he looked at the head eunuch, Xue Shan. Xue Shan had been prepared ever since the emperor had ordered Prince Jing to enter Qianqing Palace alone. At Prince Jing's glare, Luo Gonggong ordered a few servants to bring the necessary ink and paper before him. It might be a bit inconvenient, but even if he couldn't speak, he could still write. Prince Jing accepted the brush with his right hand, his left still playing with the fish. He didn't even look at what he was doing. He just wrote a couple of strokes and tossed the brush away. Not daring to look at what the prince had written, Xue Shan brought the prince's writing up to the emperor, his head lowered. When the emperor's gaze fell on the strong, powerful strokes that made up the vigorous characters, he couldn't help feeling a pang of sadness in his heart. But this was not the time to admire the prince's calligraphy. The only thing the prince had written was, "It deserved it." For as long as the emperor could remember, the prince had never once lied. This was the reason the emperor had decided to summon him, to question him directly. Back when Prince Jing had punched the other princes, he never tried to hide what he'd done, so the emperor didn't think he would deceive him in this instance. Since the prince said the cat had deserved it, then something must have happened that he didn't know about. He couldn't be too hasty. The emperor's expression darkened, and he looked toward head eunuch Luo. Xue Shan, find out who else saw what happened that day. Noble consort Chu's face twisted, betraying her panic. She had spent so much time preparing for this moment, but now the emperor was doubting her just because of a couple of random words from Prince Jing. But as the noble consort dabbed at the corners of her mouth with a silk handkerchief embroidered with crab apple blossoms, her somewhat ferocious expression settled back into its beautiful facade. So what if the emperor investigated? There wasn't a shadow of doubt that Prince Jing abused the cat. Not to mention, she even had an eyewitness. It would be good if Prince Jing admitted it, but it would be even better if he made a fuss and refused to confess. Xiao Linzi was quickly brought over from the imperial kitchen. The emperor decided to carry out the questioning himself, since the matter involved his son, Prince Jing. Xiao Linzi knelt there, his voice quavering as he recounted everything he saw that day. This servant saw, as soon as Prince Jing saw the noble consort's cat, he grabbed it, he finished. Of course, noble consort Chu was at least 2 steps ahead, having ordered her trusted servant to bribe Xiao Linzi before she even came to stand before the emperor. She knew the witness would be on her side. Your Imperial Majesty, it seems I didn't misunderstand the situation. Shouldn't Prince Jing give me an explanation? She smiled. Prince Jing, do you have anything to say? Was this all his questioning had come to? The emperor rubbed his brow. He was getting a little tired. A ruthless light flashed in Prince Jing's eyes. Noble consort Chu must have gotten her claws into Xiao Linzi, distorting the truth. He originally wanted to request that the emperor should summon a guard who had been working at the time for questioning. He doubted Xiao Linzi was the only eyewitness in such a large palace, but after considering the matter further, he quickly lost all desire to do so. It didn't matter if there were eyewitnesses present that day or not. Each side would have their own version of what happened. The situation wouldn't change. Why go through all that hassle? No, he'd be better off going straight for Xiao Linzi's throat. It was unlikely this person would stick to his story under threat of having his throat sliced open. It would be the quickest and most effective way to force him to tell the truth. Don't do it. Li Yu was extremely worried. He had a pretty good guess as to what Prince Jing's next move would be, having read the original book. Prince Jing would be walking straight into the noble consort's trap if he got violent in front of the emperor, further souring his relationship with his royal father. But if he didn't resort to violence, what else could Prince Jing do? The noble consort had clearly come prepared. First, she had managed to convince the emperor to prevent Wang Xi from accompanying Prince Jing, effectively taking away the prince's voice. Now, she'd provided an eyewitness who was extremely unfavorable toward Prince Jing. The prince was out of options. Aside from Xiaolince, the only ones who were present at the time were the cat and Li Yu. With Xiaolince deep in noble consort Chu's pocket, there was no way he'd speak the truth. Who was left to be Prince Jing's witness? The cat? Was there perhaps other evidence? Without realizing it, Li Yu had drifted to the bottom of the bowl. He'd forgotten to even keep swimming, trying his hardest to remember how the white cat had run into Prince Jing. An image came to him. When he'd peeked at Prince Jing changing, he had caught sight of what looked like a bruise on his leg. He had been so embarrassed at the time that he didn't take a good look, and what he did see had been too brief. Besides, it wasn't out of the ordinary for a man to have some bumps and bruises on his body, so Li Yu didn't think much of it. But he remembered the bruise had been right on his shin, around the same height as the cat. Was that Xiao Xue's doing? It was possible. If it were true, then it would prove the cat had attacked Prince Jing, and he had just cause for punishing it. Li Yu felt a rush of excitement at the thought of being able to clear Prince Jing's name. But now came the hard part. How could he let the prince know about his epiphany? He couldn't speak, so he had to get inventive. Desperately, he concentrated all his energy on his tail and mustered up all the strength he had to swing it. His fishtail came smacking down, and with a splash, almost half the water in the bowl sloshed out. In the silent Qianqing palace, so quiet you could hear a pin drop, the sound of the water splashing onto the golden tiles was downright cacophonic. The emperor's eyes darted to the fish. "Prince Jing, what is wrong with your fish?" he asked, baffled. Prince Jing had been staring daggers at Xiaolince. His glower was enough to convey his thoughts. "You're a dead man." But at the little carp's sudden movement, he turned to look at the fish, where it waited expectantly for him. "Closer, closer, now!" A quick and accurate swish of his tail, and Li Yu splashed all the remaining water in the bowl at Prince Jing. Prince Jing had rolled up his sleeves to keep himself dry while he played with the fish, but in just a split second, his face, chest, and robes were completely soaked, with his pants as the biggest casualty. Prince Jing said nothing, but his expression was like a dark storm cloud as he wiped at the water dripping down his face. Li Yu zipped to the bottom of the bowl to hide, too terrified to look at Prince Jing. Sob, sob, sob! The tyrant looked ready to explode! But he had no other choice. Plus, he didn't know it would get this wet. Would the tyrant deal with him first? Then Xiaolince, before going to change his clothes? Ah! Prince Jing was reaching toward him. Li Yu squeezed his eyes shut. Was this tyrant about to kill a fish? But after waiting with bated breath, all Li Yu felt was a light tap on his head, followed by a touch on his back. He was dumbfounded. Prince Jing glared at the troublemaking little carp before getting up and bowing to the emperor. The emperor understood and said, "You may change quickly. We'll continue this once you return." Wang Xi had been standing just outside, waiting anxiously. As soon as he saw this window of opportunity, he rushed in with a set of dry clothes for Prince Jing and slipped into the side hall to help him change. Li Yu let out a sigh of relief. Thank goodness Prince Jing didn't lose his temper. He had intentionally splashed water on Prince Jing's pants in hopes that the prince would see the bruise on his leg when he changed and think to use it as proof. But it was fine even if the prince never saw it, because Li Yu had still managed to buy the prince some time to cool down. In addition, now that Wang Xi was here, there was someone who could protect and speak for Prince Jing. Together, the prince and Wang Gonggong should be able to come up with a strategy to deal with a noble consort. If worst came to worst, and they were forced to concede this particular conflict to the noble consort, the emperor would, at most, ask Prince Jing to apologize to her. He wouldn't actually punish the prince. It would leave the noble consort and her son feeling smug for a while, but Prince Jing could always get his revenge later. As he waited for Prince Jing to finish changing, Li Yu swished his tail happily at how well everything had played out. Lady Chu eyed the fish Prince Jing had brought. For years, she'd held a mix of hatred and envy for Prince Jing in her heart. Prince Jing might not be present in the room right now, but she wasn't going to let him go unscathed. She stood up, sauntered over, and peered down with interest at the fish in the bowl. Something seemed to occur to her as she let out a light peal of laughter. Mu Tianzhao had followed her over. He chuckled. "Mother, what is this fish? I've never seen the likes of it before." He and his mother both had that kind of attitude to things they considered beneath them, so this really was the first time Mu Tianzhi had ever seen a live carp. The noble consort pursed her lips, then laughed daintily. "My son is of royal blood. How could you be expected to recognize such a crude thing? It's nothing but the most ordinary fish used for cooking." His lips twitched up into a smile. "My brother's taste is certainly quite unique. Perhaps I should ask our royal father to gift him some fish with a little more value." Their words of admiration were thinly veiled barbs aimed right at Prince Jing. Li Yu halted directly underneath the two of them, not even bothering to hide the fact that he was openly listening to them, utterly disgusted by their words. How dare they insult his owner and say he had no taste? That was the same as insulting him. They even had the audacity to say he was crude. Not even the emperor had gone that far. Li Yu flicked the water angrily. He had to do something. All of Lady Chu's attention was on the little carp as she came closer. She had never seen such a lively fish before, but of course, she could never have guessed that when it had splashed water all over Prince Jing just now, it had done it on purpose. After all, it was just an ordinary fish. But this fish had more guts than the noble consort could ever imagine. As she peered down at him, Li Yu was preparing himself to give her a face full of water. He had already drenched Prince Jing. There was no way he was going to show any mercy to cannon fodder. But as the noble consort approached, a flash of light caught Li Yu's eyes, and he noticed a golden phoenix hairpin by her forehead. Held delicately within the beak of the phoenix was a large, sparkling pearl about the size of a person's thumbnail. Li Yu felt his stomach drop. He had a bad feeling about this. That couldn't be the eponymous pearl from his side quest, Clear Bright Pearl, right? The system, which had been silent for a long time, replied lightly, "User, you got it right." Li Yu was stunned. Stupid system! Can you get any more annoying? How was a fish supposed to retrieve a pearl from the forehead of the emperor's beloved concubine? Splashing her was out of the question for now. The noble consort was still a little too far away. He had to get her to come a little closer first. Li Yu readied his fishtail. He was going to strike back. For the pearl. For Prince Jing. As for how... The noble consort was very calculating in the book, which meant she was also very suspicious. An idea started to form inside Li Yu's head. If you wanted to deal with these kinds of dirty tricks, you had to fight dirty too. How did a fish flip over again? Li Yu rolled over playfully, trying to rotate his belly up slowly. He floated in the water in that position without moving a muscle. It wasn't a comfortable position for a fish, but if he endured it for a little bit, he would definitely get results. The second prince was looking straight at the bowl while he spoke to noble consort Xue. He saw it clearly when, suddenly, Prince Jing's fish twitched strangely, then flipped over. "Mother, what's wrong with this fish?" he blurted out. Noble consort Xue, who was still basking in her smugness, glanced over, and her heart nearly stopped. Didn't fish flip over when they died? But this fish had been so lively just seconds ago. Lady Chu hardly cared whether a fish lived or died, of course, but this was the fish Prince Jing had brought before the emperor. The emperor himself had been acquainted with it, but now the prince had left to change his clothes, and the two of them were the closest to the fish when it suddenly died? Who'd be able to explain that? Was that all part of Prince Jing's plan? She'd used Piao Xue to cause problems for him, so he was using this fish to turn the tables on her? It was very possible. Otherwise, why would Prince Jing bring a fish to see the emperor? He had been waiting for this exact moment. This conspiracy theory was growing more and more likely to noble consort Xue, who was well versed in back palace drama. As the fish floated belly up in front of her, she began to panic. Chapter 10. Fish Style Slap. Having been the favored concubine for several years, noble consort Xue knew the emperor still had a soft spot for Prince Jing, which was why she harbored such great resentment for the prince. What if this incident brought the emperor's anger down on her, and in turn on the second prince, just when he was on the verge of becoming the crown prince? Noble consort Xue refused to let herself and her son suffer through such a disaster, so she came up with what she felt was an ingenious idea. Jiao, come. Don't make a sound. Let's hide the fish quickly. Mu Tianzhao was bewildered. Lady Chu didn't want other people to get involved. Tianqing Palace was not her territory, and the emperor was right there, on the throne. If she asked her trusted servants to deal with this, it would only serve to attract his attention. The fewer people who knew that Prince Jing's fish had died, the better. Noble consort Xue and the second prince neatly blocked the bowl from onlookers' curious eyes, quietly devising a plan. First, Lady Chu would hide the fish, then pretend to notice that the fish had vanished, triggering a search party ordered by the emperor. While everyone was distracted, she'd have time to furtively acquire another live fish. She would then have someone find it at just the right time and place. It would be a flawless switcheroo. Won't someone be able to tell? Mu Tianzhao was a little hesitant. His ascension to crown prince was tantalizingly close, and he didn't want anything to endanger it. What are you afraid of? Noble consort Xue laughed coldly. A fish like this, it's just a soup ingredient. They all look the same. Prince Jing probably won't even be able to tell the difference. Noble consort Xue was brimming with confidence, convinced her plan was foolproof. Otherwise, she wouldn't have dared to come up with something like this. What else was she supposed to do? Just wait around for Prince Jing to make her life difficult? She took another glance at the flipped-over fish floating on the waters. They had to hide the fish well so that no one would be able to find it. The best place would be inside her sleeves. No one would dare search the noble consort. Suppressing the urge to hurl, Lady Chu reached for the fish using her handkerchief. Just as she was about to touch the fish, though, the very tip of its tail, which had originally been motionless, started to shake. Then it started struggling. Noble consort Xue and the second prince jumped. Stunned, Mu Tianzhao asked, "Mother, wasn't the fish supposed to be dead? How could a fish come back to life? This was way too bizarre." Noble consort Xue didn't have time to speculate any further, nor did she have time to respond to the second prince. She'd wrapped the fish up in her handkerchief, but it was still very slippery, and now it was squirming around quite hard. If she let it slip out of her hand and fall onto the ground, here in Tianqing Palace, right in front of the emperor, she had already taken the first step. There was no turning back now. Sweat continued to bead on the noble consort's forehead. This woman had lived in the lap of luxury for a long time now, so she didn't have much grip strength. Furthermore, she was dealing with Li Yu, an expert at struggling. This time, he went all out. With his newly stronger tail, it didn't take much for him to escape from her grasp. This was the closest the little carp was ever going to get to Lady Chu. By now, Li Yu had a lot of experience swinging his tail around. He calculated the distance and made a clean swing. His original plan was to jump onto the noble consort and give her a good scare. Then, in the ensuing chaos, he'd snatch the pearl. If that didn't work and he ended up on the floor, he could just swing his tail a couple more times and try to get back into the bowl. The bowl was very close by. Being away from the water for such a short amount of time shouldn't be a problem. And besides, he had all that fresh water stored in his inventory. But unfortunately, he used too much force. With one flip, he managed to set a whole new record, landing smack dab in the middle of the noble consort's face. Uh-oh. Noble consort Chu's vision was suddenly obstructed by something cold and slippery. Prince Jing's fish had thrown itself onto her face. She screeched in horror. Ah! Her scream instantly lit a fire under Li Yu. This was, after all, the first time he had ended up on someone's face as a fish. His tail flapped furiously in alarm, slapping the noble consort's face over and over again. The second prince didn't even know how to react. The flurry of slapping noises finally jolted him out of it, though, and he yelled in panic, "Mother! Mother! Someone come quickly! Save my mother!" "Jar! Get it off! It's on my face! It's on my face!" All that the shocked and terrified Lady Chu could see were wet gray scales. She couldn't stop screaming. Mu Tianzhao wanted to help, but his hand froze mid-air, too afraid this fish would fly onto him next. Who knew what might happen? In the chaos, Li Yu found a suitable position on the noble consort's face and swished his tail once again, aiming for the glistening white pearl. This time, he took careful command of his strength to slap the golden hairpin with pinpoint accuracy. Bingo! The pearl fell from the hairpin onto the floor, just like he planned. Noble Consort Chu had put a bit of thought into choosing her hairpin, hoping to entice the emperor even when night fell with this priceless luminous pearl. But now she was panicking too hard to fret about her hair accessories. Li Yu slapped his fins a few times, straining to reach the fallen pearl, but it was no use. That pearl was standing between him and turning back into a human, and it was about to fall onto the golden bricks. It was all or nothing. Li Yu flung himself toward the jewel. Meanwhile, the emperor had been enjoying his tea while he waited for Prince Jing when he suddenly heard the noble consort and the second prince shouting and yelling. The emperor rushed over along with head eunuch Luo to see what had happened, only to find the noble consort with her hair in disarray, face paper white. Her hands were flailing about, clawing at nothing, while the second prince stood off to the side in uncertainty. The emperor didn't see Li Yu. Of course he would notice a little carp on the ground, chasing after the pearl when the consort and her son were making such a fuss. "What's going on?" demanded the emperor, furious. Li Yu couldn't reach the luminous pearl. As it hit the floor and rolled away, he made a lunge for it, but it was too late. Just as he was about to reach the pearl, a pair of hands materialized from above and pressed down on his little fish body. Who was getting in the way of completing his quest? Incensed and indignant, Li Yu glared up and straight at Prince Jing's face. Li Yu could see anger simmering beneath the surface. Fuck! Here he was flipping around, high off adrenaline at the prospect of completing his quest, only to get caught red-handed by the tyrant. Li Yu blew a listless bubble. He wanted to hide and flat out deny everything, but he was in Prince Jing's palm. There was nowhere to hide. Had Prince Jing seen him slap Noble Consort Chu and steal the pearl? What? He had to be in big trouble with the prince, but he wasn't playing around for no reason. Noble Consort Chu was definitely going to report Li Yu to the emperor for what he just did. But so long as he returned to the bowl before the emperor noticed him, there was no way the emperor would believe her. After all, how could a fish jump out of the bowl, humiliate Lady Chu, and then jump back in? Right, he needed to get back. It felt awful to be out of the water. He had to figure out a way to return to the bowl without Prince Jing noticing, but that was way harder than tricking Lady Chu had been. Prince Jing was no fool. Li Yu had to be careful. While Li Yu was still racking his fish brain for ideas, Prince Jing slipped him gently back into the water. Li Yu was shocked and relieved to find himself surrounded by water in his bowl again. Wow, the tyrant actually put him back. He wiggled a bit to demonstrate his affection, but Prince Jing glared at him again. The little carp could clearly read the threat in the tyrant's eyes. "I'll deal with you later." Li Yu shrunk back. Wait, is that why he didn't get mad earlier? Was he saving it for later? He didn't want to be fish soup, and he didn't want to die either, so Li Yu decided he might as well let the tyrant pinch him a few more times. He arched his back into Prince Jing's hand in an effort to wiggle his way back into the prince's good graces. Surely letting Prince Jing get a few squeezes in would get him out of trouble? Prince Jing stared, unimpressed. "Your Imperial Majesty, please believe me. I don't know why Prince Jing's fish just leaped onto my face." Lady Chu was still in shock as she knelt in front of the emperor, weeping. She loathed Prince Jing with all her heart, so much that she wished for his death. Did she fall into his trap? Had Prince Jing acquired a fish with the ability to resurrect itself for the sole purpose of embarrassing her in front of the emperor? This terrifying ordeal had noble consort Chu shocked out of her wits. She felt like everyone and everything was out to get her. The emperor rubbed his temples and looked over at Prince Jing, faintly confused. Prince Jing scoffed and gestured at the bowl, placed not too far away with his chin. He'd made sure no one was paying attention when he put the little carp back in. Since noble consort Chu had bribed people to slander him, he'd give her a taste of her own medicine. Let her have a turn at being unable to explain herself. Prince Jing took another glance at the intriguing little carp that had managed to create this situation for him. What divine fortune! The emperor ordered Luo Ruisheng to investigate the scene, only to be informed that Prince Jing's fish was swimming happily in its bowl. This time, the emperor was irate. The noble consort is telling a bald-faced lie. Prince Jing's fish is clearly in its bowl. Lady Chu felt all the blood rush to her head. Fury and anxiety saturated her voice. Your Imperial Majesty, it's true! That fish flew out just now! The emperor's brows furrowed. So you're saying a fish can fly? And not only can it fly, but it flew out, harassed you, and then somehow flew back? At this point, the fish was like a trigger for noble consort Chu. She nodded furiously. That's exactly it! Joar saw it too! Noble consort, have you gone mad? The emperor sighed, disbelief written all over his face. Lady Chu had seemed fine before, but all of a sudden she was kicking up a fuss, spewing all sorts of foolishness. A fish that could fly? How was that possible? If she hadn't gone mad, why else would she talk such nonsense? And even mess up her own hair? If you want to make up ridiculous stories, then so be it. But do you have to try to drag Jiao'er down with you? Mu Tianzhao had opened his mouth to corroborate his mother's account, but on hearing the emperor's words, he shut it again. Noble consort Chu kept shooting him pointed looks, but since the emperor didn't believe her, the emperor would only become more upset if he insisted on backing her up. What was the point of playing the hero for a fleeting moment? Mu Tianzhao would give up anything for the position of crown prince. In a sensible tone, he said, Royal father, you're right. I did not see it clearly. Mu Tianzhao guiltily avoided his mother's look of disbelief. He was about to become the crown prince. Was it wrong to have some self-preservation? The emperor said unhappily, Noble consort, even Tianzhao agrees. What do you have to say for yourself? Lady Chu bit her cherry lips. Your Imperial Majesty, I forgot myself and misspoke. Please forgive me. Even her own son had turned his back on her. So what else could she say? She'd had a momentary lapse in judgment? It didn't matter how much she complained. It was useless if the emperor didn't believe her. The best thing for her to do now was to keep her head down and wait for the emperor's anger to dissipate. There was no need to fight with a stupid fish. Right at the moment that Lady Chu admitted her folly, Prince Jing's boot stepped on an embroidered handkerchief. Wang Xi, who had been following behind Prince Jing, rushed forward and picked the handkerchief up. Wang Xi took the handkerchief out to check who it belonged to and let out a shocked exclamation. Wang Xi, what is your issue? Groaned the emperor, whose head was beginning to hurt from all these things happening one after another. Wang Xi said, Your Imperial Majesty, this servant just picked up the noble consort's handkerchief, but why does it have fish scales on it? As he spoke, Wang Xi raised the handkerchief so that everyone could see, a handkerchief embroidered with crab apple flowers. Even the emperor knew it belonged to the noble consort, and just as Wang Xi said, there were a few fish scales still stuck on it. Why would the noble consort's handkerchief have fish scales on it? There was only one fish in all of Qianqing Palace. Prince Jing's fierce eyes flashed over the noble consort, his gaze as sharp as a knife. Wang Xi immediately spoke for the prince. Fish scales are part of the fish. They don't fall off for no reason. Did the noble consort do something to our master fish while our prince wasn't here? As expected of Prince Jing's spokesperson, a powerful attack from Wang Gonggong. Li Yu was delighted. But when did he become a master? He was just a fish. Master? The emperor was speechless. Wang Xi beamed as he exclaimed, Your Imperial Majesty, this servant heard from Xiaolinza first. Xiaolinza called the noble consort's cat Master Cat. It's only logical for His Highness's fish to be Master Fish. As the master of the world, the emperor was everyone's master. Was the noble consort trying to put the cat and the emperor on the same level by calling it master? Nonsense. Don't call them that in the future. The emperor glared at Lady Chu. Noble consort Chu, what did you do to Prince Jing's fish? Why are there fish scales on your handkerchief? There was no way the noble consort was going to admit she had used her handkerchief to pick the fish up. She hadn't realized it at first, but the moment she walked over to look at the fish, the tables had been turning against her. This fish definitely had it in for her. She'd barely even had time to do anything to it. The fish was clearly the one who was tormenting her. Noble consort Chu sobbed. Your Imperial Majesty, why don't you ask Prince Jing? He was the one who bullied my Piaoshi first. Your Imperial Majesty. Throwing everything to the wind, Wang Xi fell to his knees and declared loudly, People are always taking advantage of His Highness's inability to speak in order to frame him. As you know, his injuries take a long time to heal. It's been true since he was young. All the imperial physicians know this. When His Highness was changing just now, this servant noticed a large bruise on his leg. Its position matches the body shape of that cat. That day, the noble consort's cat ran into His Highness first. That's why His Highness taught it a lesson. This servant implores your Imperial Majesty to believe His Highness. A bruise from the cat? Noble consort's pupils constricted. Why hadn't she thought of such a flaw in her plan? The emperor was very upset to hear that Prince Jing had been injured, and he immediately called for an imperial physician to treat his injury. Once the doctor confirmed that there really was a bruise, the emperor was no longer able to contain his ire. It's just a cat. How dare it injure a prince? It seems he was right. It really did deserve it. If the cat was the one who ran into Prince Jing, Xiao Lince must have lied. A quick investigation uncovered the truth. He had been bribed by the noble consort. Qianqing Palace was a bloodbath. The flames of the emperor's temper surged to a fierce blaze. He hadn't announced the crown prince yet, and noble consort Chu was already out for Prince Jing's blood. When she became empress dowager in the future, would Prince Jing make it out alive? The emperor confined Lady Chu to her palace, where she was banned from coming out without a summons. Originally, he'd been planning to promote her to imperial noble consort soon after her birthday, but he really didn't feel like it anymore. Even looking at the future crown prince, the second crown prince, put him in a foul mood. Lady Chu could have never predicted that her carefully planned scheme would be thwarted in the end by a mere fish. Liu Yu had really gone above and beyond this time. It was rowdy out there in the palace, and listening to the kerfuckle was making him sleepy. Thinking there were still a couple pieces of food left at the bottom of the bowl, Liu Yu managed to pull himself together enough to swim over and eat the fish food. Just as he was about to doze off, he was hit with the feeling that he had forgotten something. Wait, the clear, bright pearl! He'd almost forgotten. Liu Yu immediately flew up to the surface, scanning his surroundings. There it was. The pearl was sitting all by its lonesome in a corner of the palace. No one had realized the noble consort's hair ornament was missing a luminous pearl. Liu Yu was itching to go for it. All he had to do was sneak out and grab the pearl. Even a touch would be good. Perhaps it would be enough for a quest complete. But just then, Wang Xi strolled over, all smiles, grabbing his bowl, and headed outside. What? It turned out the emperor was still reprimanding Lady Chu. Prince Jing didn't have the patience to listen any longer, so he got up to leave. The little carp that had accompanied him to meet the emperor obviously had to leave with him too. Hey, are you kidding me? I haven't grabbed the pearl! Wang Xi was only a few steps away from leaving the palace, bowl in hand, when he saw the little carp leaning against the rim of the bowl. It seemed to be staring longingly in a particular direction. Wang Xi nearly laughed out loud. He shook his head. He must be imagining things. As he watched the pearl get farther and farther away from him, his chances of completing the mission dwindling, Liu Yu felt himself deflate. Right next to him, Prince Jing noted that the little carp looked listless. He considered for a moment and then ordered a servant to go and take a look. Before long, the servant came back holding a pearl. Prince Jing recognized the luminous pearl. It was the same one the noble consort wore on her head. He was very sure this was what the little carp had been looking at, because when he emerged from the side hall after changing, he saw the little carp flopping after it. It wanted the jewel that badly? Master, master, please give me the pearl. An invigorated Li Yu swam over. He shimmied cutely, trying to cozy up to the prince by swimming in circles around his hand. It was obvious Li Yu was trying to kiss up to him. Did the fish think wiggling cutely a few times would get him the pearl? It wouldn't be that easy. Prince Jing still had a bone to pick with him. With a faint smile, Prince Jing slipped the pearl into his sleeve. Chapter 11. The fish made a mistake. Li Yu followed Prince Jing and his servants back to Jing Tai Hall. He made countless attempts to endear himself to the prince on the way there, but Prince Jing, who had been tapping him on the head back in Tianqing Palace, didn't react at all. He even tucked away the luminous pearl. Li Yu was a little frustrated. Didn't he at least deserve some credit for inconveniencing noble consort Chu? Was it that hard to let him hold the pearl for a bit? It wasn't like he was going to monopolize it. He only needed it to complete his quest. After the quest was finished, he'd be done with it. But there was no need to get himself too worked up. Perhaps it was just a coincidence that Prince Jing had taken the pearl. Communication between a fish and a mute prince was too difficult. Li Yu switched tactics and started swimming in circles around the bowl. Perhaps by mimicking the shape of a pearl, he could give Prince Jing a hint. But the prince kept on acting like he couldn't see him. "Little thing, what are you trying to do?" Wang Xi chuckled. Wang Gonggong had resolved to take good care of this fish from now on. Although it was just an ordinary, edible carp, this little creature had brought Prince Jing a substantial amount of good luck. It splashed the prince with water, but that had allowed them to discover the bruise from Piao Xue, which in turn was what helped them get over on the noble consort. Wang Xi had looked down on Xiao Linzi for calling Piao Xue Master Cat, but now he was all too eager to eat his words and call the fish Master too. Li Yu stiffened at Wang Xi's question. How could he make these people understand that all he wanted was the pearl? He didn't want anything else. Should he swim in the shape of the word pearl? No, probably not. If he really did manage to write something, he might scare Wang Xi witless. Worse yet, what if Wang Xi mistook him for a fish spirit? Cultivation had been banned ever since the founding of the PRC. May the heavens have mercy. He was just an innocent transmigrated fish. He'd better come up with something else. Wang Xi carried the large bowl to the room that the little carp had been in before. Li Yu watched as the fish moved farther and farther away. Hey, wasn't he supposed to live with the tyrant? But after thinking about it some more, Li Yu realized he hadn't actually seen a bed or anything to sleep on. The prince had only entered that room to change. It obviously wasn't his bedroom. In ancient times, a concubine's favor with the emperor could apparently be determined by how far away she lived from him. It was probably the same for pets. But a pet that didn't live with its owner practically wasn't a pet at all. Li Yu could see it now. He was going to fail all his quests, and there was only one way that led: fish bones and fish ash. He couldn't be separated from Prince Jing. Li Yu had been looking kind of wilted, but now he was full of energy again. Living was way more important than some bright shiny pearl. He still had to get along with Prince Jing. Since Wang Xi had asked him what he wanted, Li Yu was going to show him. He bravely poked his head out of the water to look in Prince Jing's direction, his gaze bright and gleaming. Wang Xi was so happy he couldn't close his mouth. Oh, this little thing can't bear to part from His Highness. It wants to stay with him. Li Yu was incredibly flustered at being called little thing again, but desperate times called for desperate measures. He blew a bubble. That's somewhat difficult, little thing. Wang Xi must have been in a surprisingly good mood because he actually gave the fish an explanation. His Highness doesn't like others in his room. Li Yu was baffled. This was the first time Li Yu had heard of his tyrant owner having a pet peeve like that. This bit of characterization probably wasn't in the book. The prince in the book was just made up of rows of cold and lifeless text. But the prince sitting before him was an actual living, breathing person. And Li Yu knew that people were multifaceted and much more complicated than words on a page could describe. Li Yu could accept this new information. Prince Jing didn't like others entering his room. Fair enough. But he wasn't just anyone. He was his pet fish. Li Yu continued wagging his tail at Wang Xi. He really wanted to go. Wang Xi couldn't help smiling. Sometimes he felt like this little carp was very intelligent and a bit clingy. Who didn't like a clingy pet? He wanted to help the little carp. He liked fish. Fish were quiet. They didn't get in the way, no matter where you put them. They were more or less a decorative piece. But it turned out he didn't need to convince Prince Jing, for the prince had already taken the bowl from him, a dark expression on his face. Wang Gonggong was getting the sense that the prince wasn't in the greatest of moods. Not for the first time, he found himself thinking that he really couldn't understand Prince Jing. Prince Jing carried the little carp to the forbidden bedroom where no outsiders were permitted to enter. He had given the fish the cold shoulder all the way back from Tianqing Palace, but now it dared to wag its tail at Wang Xi? Prince Jing hadn't been standing too far away when the fish was playing with Wang Xi. His gaze as he watched them could have frozen the entire room. It was a very peculiar feeling, like when he was young and Mu Tianzhao had stolen something that belonged to him. It made him very unhappy, and only seizing it back made him feel a little better. He had already said so in front of the emperor. The fish was now his. He should be the one to decide where it lived. He didn't need anyone else to intervene. Accordingly, he took the fish away to his room and told nobody to bother him. Wang Xi would never be able to imagine the inner workings of Prince Jing's mind. In order to please his master, Wang Gonggong hastily ordered some servants to bring over the porcelain fish tank from the first room. He was worried about Prince Jing's lack of pet fish knowledge, too, so he also summoned a few servants who had experience taking care of fish, cats, and dogs, just in case. After everything was settled and he had been moved back into his porcelain fish tank, Li Yu did a lap around the tank. Someone had already changed the water, and the leaf blanket and bed of white rocks were still waiting for him, untouched. This was truly the best place. It was much nicer to swim in here than in the bowl. Somehow, he realized he had gotten used to thinking about things from a fish's perspective. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Was it a good or bad thing that he had adapted to all this so quickly? After dawdling for a while and making sure nobody was paying attention to him, he ducked under the leaf blanket, pretending to rest, and entered the system. The last time Li Yu had done this, he had been bursting with joy, excited to receive his prize. It was a very different story this time around. He was deflated and gloomy. He had made little to no progress in either the main or side quests. The fish scamming system greeted him as usual, but didn't provide him with any extra hints. Half of the allotted time for the getting along step in the priceless pet fish quest had already slipped by. Seeing the emperor hadn't helped him make any progress either. It was obvious he had to work a little harder. It was a shame he couldn't complete Clear Bright Pearl. Maybe he should give it another try? It was just within reach. Either way, Li Yu thought, he was already in Prince Jing's room. He was supposed to be his pet. He needed to have a little less shame about it. It wouldn't be all that weird for him to wiggle his way into his owner's clothes and just so happen to accidentally pull out a pearl or something, right? Time was of the essence. Resolving to leave his shame behind, Li Yu exited the system. While he was inside the system, he couldn't tell what was happening in the outside world. Now that he was out again, he shook himself and came to an abrupt realization that he was lying in the tyrant's hand. Li Yu nearly jumped out of his skin. Prince Jing cupped his hands, holding the fish so that it was still surrounded by water. He had never observed the fish up close before. As soon as the little carp settled down, he couldn't resist taking a look. It was a strange fish, he thought, but it was also intriguing. When he'd first picked the fish up, he noticed it was completely stiff, unmoving. His brow twitched, and he immediately called over a servant who had raised fish before. After examining the fish for a few minutes, they concluded it was likely asleep. Prince Jing then called over another servant for a second opinion, and this one said the exact same thing. After roughly 10 minutes, Prince Jing dismissed all of them and continued staring at the fish alone. If it was asleep, then it would eventually wake up. He wanted to see what other tricks this fish had up its sleeve. The little carp didn't sleep for long. Prince Jing was so close that he saw the fish tail twitch a little. Then, without warning, the fish jolted forward, nearly falling over in the water. Not for the first time, Prince Jing thought that the fish had the same dazed kind of look as a person who'd just woken up. But as soon as the fish saw him, it seemed sluggish. Prince Jing was slightly annoyed and tapped on the little carp's head. Why had it been so lively in front of Wang Xi, but seemed wooden and slow with him? The tap made Li Yu shake his head, remembering the task at hand. He started to wiggle his tail in his attempt to wheedle his way into the prince's favor. Ever since he had become a pet fish, swishing his tail and begging for pity was the only other survival skill he had outside of swimming. Except his owner didn't appreciate it. Prince Jing scoffed, his expression cold. Trying to kiss up to him now? Too late. His palm was only so big, and it was impossible for the fish to keep wiggling like this without touching his hand. The feeling of the fish tail against his palm was a little odd, but Prince Jing refused to let it show. Li Yu took no notice. He was still trying to act cute, but his eyes kept trailing over to Prince Jing's clothing. The prince had put the luminous pearl in his sleeve, he remembered. If he could sneak into the prince's sleeve... Wait, he was in Prince Jing's hand right now. He could pretend that fish were very slippery. Li Yu swam to the edge of the prince's palm, deliberately slowly. He just needed to turn his body and flip over, but while he managed to do exactly that, as soon as his body left the confines of his palm, Prince Jing caught him with the other hand and put him back. Li Yu was stunned. I'll flip again. He tried twisting from the other side, but Prince Jing was faster. With his hands carefully cupped, he was able to hold him completely. Li Yu was pissed. Prince Jing peered down at him. He looked like he was smiling. Was he doing this on purpose? Did he hide the pearl just to toy with him? Li Yu's mind spun. He thought smugly, then how about this? He didn't fight against the prince. Instead, following the line down Prince Jing's palm and arm, Li Yu slid down. Prince Jing froze. At first, he thought the fish had been making a break for it, but he absolutely did not expect it to try to wriggle into his sleeve. Aided by the water in Prince Jing's hand, the little fish slid down his arm, managing to slip right into his sleeve in the blink of an eye. Prince Jing, normally as sturdy as an ice-capped mountain, felt goosebumps erupting all over his skin. He furrowed his brows tightly. Meanwhile, Li Yu, who had successfully managed to infiltrate enemy territory, found himself stuck to a large patch of muscle. What was this feeling? Did Prince Jing not wear an inner robe? Li Yu lay against this unknown muscle, his face blazing. In his original world, he was but an innocent boy who had been single his entire life. Now that he had transmigrated into a book, he was suddenly touching skin to skin with another man. He was so embarrassed. Li Yu was so flustered he wanted to cover his face with his fins, but they were too short. With no other way to unleash his emotions, he resorted to fiercely flapping his tail instead. Prince Jing, who had been bearing with all of these bizarre sensations, felt something scratching at him non-stop. How could anyone put up with that? Prince Jing was about to break out in a cold sweat. He quickly untied his clothes, wanting to pull the troublesome fish out. Inside his sleeve, Li Yu was getting more and more annoyed. The sleeve was narrow and dark. If he moved around, he would slide further down, unable to stop. If he opened his eyes, the fabric would stab into them. Filled with regret over his impulsive decision, Li Yu was desperate to leave. In a fit of distress, he thrashed around even more wildly, but his struggling only increased Prince Jing's discomfort. As he flailed about, though, Li Yu spotted a faint glow. Dizzily, he wondered why there would be light in Prince Jing's clothes. Could it be the clear, bright pearl? How sneaky. Prince Jing may have stuffed the pearl deep into his sleeve, but he couldn't fool Li Yu. Victory was just a step away. He could do it. Li Yu fought hard to move toward the light. He'd come this far already. Nothing could stop him now. No matter what, he had to touch it first. As he shuffled closer to the light, he thought he could see a hazy, round thing. Oh, pearls were round. Li Yu opened his mouth wide and went for it. The moment his fish jaws closed around the round thing, Li Yu was overcome with emotion. Terrified the pearl might roll away from him, he clamped down hard. Li Yu felt Prince Jing flinch violently. The next moment, his dark surroundings brightened. All the clothing that had been in the way was now gone, and he could see Prince Jing, his upper half completely bare, with a rare hint of pink on his cheeks. He scowled down at Li Yu, irate. With the luminous pearl in his mouth, the little carp couldn't blow bubbles, so he opted to wave his tail happily at his owner instead, which was when he realized he was lying entirely on the prince's chest. Hold on. How did he get from the sleeve to here? Keeping his death grip on the pearl, Li Yu scoured his surroundings. All he could see was a landscape of pale skin. Especially here, where the pearl was, he could feel the prince's pulse within his chest. Wait, Li Yu finally noticed something was wrong. Did Prince Jing hang the pearl around his neck? It was the noble consort's pearl. Did he have to go so far? The make and model of the pearl was not quite right either. The texture felt a little soft. Li Yu arrived at a horrifying conclusion. Trembling, oh God, oh God, oh God, I'm so sorry. Trembling, he opened his mouth and reluctantly looked at the luminous pearl he had just held within his mouth. That wasn't a pearl. Not at all. That was the thing used to differentiate between the front and back of a man. The fish suffered a devastating blow. The little carp collapsed, dropping down from Prince Jing's chest. But Prince Jing, with his lightning-fast reflexes, managed to catch him. Just then, Wang Xi pushed open the door. He had wanted to ask Prince Jing a question, but he had waited some time, and the prince never came out of his room. Left without another choice, Wang Xi came in to take a look, only to be faced with Prince Jing in a state of undress, face flushed pink and fish in hand. Wang Xi was shocked. Who knew what Wang Gonggong, experienced and knowledgeable in all his worldly wisdom, was thinking about when he came upon the scene? He was so aghast, his voice even changed. Your Highness, you can't. The fish is too small. It wouldn't be able to take it. This entire day had just been a never-ending stream of embarrassments. God, please just let this fish die. Chapter 12. This fish wants to apologize. Li Yu knew he had screwed up big time. There was no question about it. Prince Jing must be furious. Not only had Li Yu splashed water on him and caused a ruckus in Qianqing Palace when Prince Jing wasn't there, now Li Yu had gone and felt him up too. Li Yu's ancestors must be protecting him. It was the only way he could explain why the prince hadn't killed him then and there. He couldn't remember how he went from Prince Jing's hand back to his fish tank, nor could he recall swimming back to his bed of white rocks. Normally, fish fell asleep in the blink of an eye, but Li Yu had spent half the night tossing and turning and hadn't slept a wink. But the moonlight outside the window shone into the porcelain fish tank, making the bottom of the water sparkle and shine. Li Yu felt his mood lift a little at the sight. Thinking about what he had gone through, he felt even more humiliated. No matter how shameless he was, that was it for him. There was no way he was going to attempt to complete Clear Bright Pearl again. He should just give up on the side quest and focus on the main quest. He was sure there would be other opportunities for him to transform back into a human in the future. Having finally convinced himself, he decided to put all his energy into figuring out how to get along with Prince Jing. But this whole mess had scared him pretty badly. Whenever he saw Prince Jing, he felt uncomfortable all over, as though he could still feel the softness in his mouth. His fishtail felt like it was being roasted over an open fire, the heat spreading quickly through his entire body. How could he be so foolish as to confuse a pearl with that? Li Yu buried his head under his leaf blanket in a huff. If he was this miserable, Prince Jing probably wasn't much better. Li Yu knew that if he was in Prince Jing's royal shoes and he had been bitten there by a fish, he'd never hear the end of it as long as he lived. And he just had to do this himself right after he insisted on staying in Prince Jing's room. They couldn't get away from each other anymore. There was nowhere for him to find an antidote for his regret. Without really meaning to, Li Yu started avoiding Prince Jing. When the prince passed by, Li Yu either had his tail turned to him or he was hiding motionlessly under his blanket, pretending to be asleep. He only acted cute for food when Wang Xi came to see him. Wang Xi would feed him a plethora of red-colored food, but for some reason, his gaze would always be tinged with pity. He would whisper, "Little thing, you've suffered a lot. Eat more and grow fat." But it was dangerous for a fish to fatten up. The little carp started to grow wary. Did Prince Jing want to turn him into fish soup? Thank goodness Wang Xi still used a ruyi to nudge him into swimming a few laps after each meal. At first, Li Yu didn't understand why he did it, but he soon learned from Wang Gongong's chatter that fish weren't supposed to eat too much, and he was pushing Li Yu to swim around so he could digest better. Perhaps it was because he had followed the taciturn Prince Jing for many years, but Wang Xi never seemed to run out of things to say. When he stood before his master, Wang Xi had to carefully consider his words before he spoke, but he had no such qualms when it came to the little carp. The image of a hand came to mind, making Li Yu pause. The fingers were pinched together, gently pushing him to swim around. He gorged himself back then, too, so Prince Jing had been helping him digest that time. But because he couldn't speak, and because of his personality, Prince Jing didn't reveal it to anyone. As grateful as Li Yu felt, his guilt just continued to grow. He knew Prince Jing was good to him, and yet he had taken advantage of him. It had been a misunderstanding, an accident, but he knew he was still at fault. A bit wrung out, the little carp wondered if he and Prince Jing would be able to go back to how they were before. Was he going to have to continue avoiding the prince, never complete his quests, and eventually turn into fish bones and fish ash? Li Yu couldn't accept his life ending for such an outrageous reason. He needed to pull himself together. He wanted to complete his tasks happily with Prince Jing and not have to hide whenever he heard the prince's footsteps. He should try to apologize. Misunderstanding or not, he was still the one in the wrong. As long as he apologized, even if an apology from a fish meant nothing to the prince, he could at least turn over a new leaf and face Prince Jing like normal. But the problem was, how was he going to do it? He had already spun in circles and danced the seaweed dance plenty of times, so those wouldn't be worth anything. He couldn't write, leaving him no way for him to communicate in a human language. He couldn't even prepare a proper gift. The porcelain fish tank he lived in, the bed, and the blanket, none of those belonged to him. How could he show he was truly sorry? Li Yu swam a lap in the tank, troubled. Then his gaze fell upon a lone piece of fish food. It was a chunk of fish food Wang Xi had thrown to him not too long ago, but Li Yu hadn't touched it because he didn't have much of an appetite. But since it was given to him, it now belonged to him. He could give this to Prince Jing to demonstrate his sincerity. Li Yu picked up the food and hid it. Worried it might not be enough, he hid a couple more until he had 6 pieces, an auspicious number. Prince Jing was rarely in the room during the day. He usually only came by at night. Once night fell and the lamps had been lit, Li Yu figured it was about time. He picked out the pieces of fish food and laid them out carefully. Happiness expanding his chest, he waited for Prince Jing to return. "So what if I bit my owner there? I'm just a fish. You can forgive me, right?" Tonight, however, unbeknownst to Li Yu, Prince Jing had something to take care of and had returned to his manor outside of the palace. Li Yu waited until he couldn't stay up any longer, but Prince Jing never came back that night. Prince Jing hurried back to Jingtai Hall bright and early the next day, the morning dew clinging to the bottom of his boots. Wang Xi led a group of servants to help him change. At the first opportunity, Prince Jing shot a glance at the porcelain fish tank. Ever since the little carp bit him, Prince Jing felt like the fish had been a little listless. Moreover, the listlessness was directed at him personally and no one else. The fish would swish his tail when Wang Xi was over there, but as soon as Prince Jing walked over, the only thing he'd see was a clump of water plants. Prince Jing was a little irritated. Wasn't he the one who had been bitten? How dared this fish ignore him when he hadn't even done anything yet? Prince Jing wasn't a very laid-back person. He couldn't stop thinking about it. He needed to set things straight between him and the fish and establish some rules. While he wouldn't be so cruel as to deprive his own fish of food and water, Prince Jing still wanted the fish to suffer a little hardship, so it'd think twice about getting too rowdy and making more trouble for him. He had already written the rules down one by one, and all that was left to do was to have Wang Xi implement them. One of them was that he was going to seal the pearl from Tianting Palace in a clear jar, then put the jar in the fish tank. Prince Jing knew how badly the little carp wanted the pearl, but he wasn't going to just hand it over. Making it look at what it couldn't touch would build character. That way, it would come to understand that one couldn't have everything one wanted in life. Your Highness, do you think the little thing will understand what you mean by this? Wang Xi really wanted to tell the prince that this little thing was just a fish. A fish definitely wouldn't be able to understand such profound principles. Unfortunately, he didn't have any power to talk Prince Jing out of it. Prince Jing was adamant. He nodded solemnly. It must be done. Wang Xi sighed. He couldn't go against his master's wishes. He went to prepare. After changing, Prince Jing strolled to the fish tank. The little carp wasn't hiding anymore, nor was it on its white stone bed. Instead, it had fallen asleep in front of a neat line of fish food. For a moment, he thought someone was abusing the fish to the point that it was starting to store food. The little carp woke up soon after. He peered around and noticed the fish food had remained untouched. He looked up, and when he met Prince Jing's eyes, he started to spin happily in circles. No. Li Yu shook his head. He almost forgot himself and started to dance the seaweed dance. Li Yu tried his best to lower his head in the water. His fins were too short for him to clasp his hands in front of him to bow, so he gave up on the gesture and instead brought each piece of fish food before Prince Jing, lowering his head again each time. Prince Jing wasn't quite sure how to react. Wang Xi was shocked. Your Highness, what is the little thing doing? Prince Jing looked from the row of food to the little carp's constantly bobbing head. He watched it for a while, thinking, was the little carp asking for forgiveness, trying to kiss up to him, or something else? Regardless of the reason, the fish seemed to want him to eat. But humans couldn't eat fish food, obviously. The corner of Prince Jing's lip twitched at the fish's absurd ideas. Seeing that the prince was deep in thought, Wang Xi didn't dare make a sound. But the servant Wang Xi had sent out before to carry out the prince's orders had returned, so Wang Xi timidly interrupted. Your Highness, the luminous pearl has been put into the bottle at your request. Wang Xi had to call out to Prince Jing several times before the prince pulled himself out of his reverie. In Wang Xi's hand was the little bottle with the luminous pearl. Originally, Prince Jing had signaled to Wang Xi that he would punish the little carp by placing the pearl trapped inside the bottle into the fish tank himself. The bottle was very secure, and the opening had been sealed with wax. There was no way a fish would be able to open it. But at the sight of the fish blowing bubbles at him, Prince Jing hesitated. He stopped Wang Xi. Wang Xi didn't understand what was happening, but Prince Jing had already grabbed the little bottle from him. The bottle, clutched in his hand, hovered just above the fish tank. The luminous pearl's glow was dazzling, even from inside the bottle. Its glimmer filled up the whole fish tank, and Li Yu's attention was drawn to it instantly. There was no doubt that was the clear, bright pearl he had been yearning for. Was he dreaming? What was going on? He'd completely given up on his side quest, but now the prince was bringing out the pearl? Li Yu was haunted by the memory of what had happened the last time he was too impulsive, and he didn't dare make any sudden movements. He sat obediently in his tank, his tail quivering in anticipation. What was the prince doing? It couldn't be what he was thinking of, right? The youth standing before the fish tank silently opened the bottle and dumped the pearl straight into the tank. One couldn't have everything they wanted in life, but as long as someone held him sincerely in their heart, he would take care of them, even if it was just a fish. Li Yu watched the luminous pearl fall in slow motion, like a dazzling meteor shooting by. He let out a cheer, his tail flinging him high into the air, and caught the pearl. All right, everyone. That concludes the reading of chapters 9 through 12. And oh my God, I could not stop laughing this entire freaking time. I'm going to work my way backwards through my notes. The first thing that I want to say is that I'm super happy that Prince Jing basically surmised that the fish, or Li Yu, was apologizing to him and therefore decided to go ahead and give him the pearl rather than, following through with his punishment. To me, that showed that he's a level-headed person, but also like not someone who seeks to make people suffer just for the heck of it because he can, And of course, Li Yu had mentioned that in the book he was reading that Prince Jing was ruthless, and he would take out your whole family if you offended him or whatever. But here, when it comes to Li Yu, it even mentioned, he would, be good to someone who treated him sincerely or had him in his heart. But it just really goes to show that people have the capacity to be both good and evil. I know a lot of times people have the debate on, like, are people born good or are they born evil? And if you ask me, I think we're born with the capacity to be both. But when we are first born, we are born neutral. There's no good or bad. We can't do anything when we're first in this world. And then, based on, nature and nurture, things happen, and the chemical makeup of a person's brain and just their own self determines whether they come out to be good or bad. And so, again, it's really nice to see that Prince Jing is, being good. So now the next thing I want to mention is, yes. So the meaning of the number 6, just so you all know, because Li Yu had saved 6 pieces of fish food and he was saying it's an auspicious number. So in China, 6 represents luck, essentially. And even they have a saying when something is really awesome or really cool, they'll say Liu, 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 which is 666, which also brings another funny thing to mind. Because in America, or I won't necessarily say in America, but for those who are Christians, regardless of where they are in the world, typically speaking, 6 is not a good number when there's 3 of them together. That's the representation of the Antichrist, the devil, or whatever. Shoot, I don't remember exactly. But the point is, it's not good. But all numbers and colors and animals and all of that stuff, flowers, have different meanings depending on where you are in the world. And so it was just really cool to me when I finally learned a few years ago that 666 in China meant something completely different than it did in the Christian religion. And I don't think that's a bad thing either. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me not go on a tangent. Let's just go to my next point. So immediately, the whole scene where he held a certain part of Prince Jing in his mouth, before it even said it, well, y'all heard my reaction. Let's just not talk about that, okay? And it was so freaking hilarious. And so I'm just going to go to my other note. The other thing I wanted to say is I think it's so adorable that Li Yu is becoming accustomed to being a fish, which I'm not surprised. I feel like if we are human and then we're suddenly put into the body of an animal, our natural senses, our bodies and everything are going to morph into, the thing that we're inhabiting, but we still have human thoughts. But it's so cute to see. So then I also want to go back to page 103 when it was the whole ordeal with Consort Xue saying that the fish slapped her and her being upset that her son didn't defend her and be like, yeah, that's exactly what happened. And she was mad at him. I don't think it was fair for her to be mad, and I think she needs to realize that, because ultimately, with the fish being back in its bowl and no one else having seen what happened, then I feel like the emperor would just look at both of them like they were crazy. And at the end of the day, it had already been mentioned that the most important thing was for Mu Tianzhao to become the crown prince. So it's probably best that he doesn't look like a lunatic in front of the emperor so that he can be named the crown prince. But I digress. The other point that I have is actually a question, which I'm sure we may figure out later on. Aside from the typical imperial palace nonsense with all the multiple concubines and the consort, the empress, blah, 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 and, having children and each mother hating the other person's child and wanting her child to ascend the throne, blah, blah, blah. I want to know why Noble Consort 2 hates Prince Jing so much to the point that she even wants him to die. Like, I just feel like that's a little excessive. What has he done? It's already clear that, like, he's probably not going to be named as Crown Prince, at least as of now. But, so, like, what's the deal, lady? Anyway, let's go to my second to last point, which is, I thought it was funny when Noble Consort 2 thought that Prince Jing wouldn't be able to tell the difference if they got another fish. And I just thought, lady, you have no idea what you're talking about. Because first off, this fish has spunk, okay? So if he gets another fish that's just acting like a completely normal fish when he's already felt like this fish was being more human, yeah, he's going to know that something happened with this fish. Not to mention, I'm wondering if Li Yu's fish body has scars on it from when he was in the cat's mouth. So he'd know the difference. And the last thing I wanted to say was actually something that Li Yu had mentioned early on about Noble Consort 2 being a very calculating person, but that she was also very paranoid. And I just thought, usually overly calculating people are always paranoid because they're devious, they're deceitful. And it reminds me of cheaters, how they'll say people that cheat are always the first to accuse their significant other of cheating. And so it just kind of reminded me of that, kind of like the backlash of their own terrible habit that, like if you're accusing your partner of cheating and they're doing absolutely nothing to show that they're doing so, then they're going to suspect you of cheating because, like, why are you bringing it up? And so I kind of think of it in the same fashion. When someone is overly devious and they're always paranoid, thinking someone is out to get them, then it's kind of like, okay, well, what are you doing in your life to always think that someone is out to get you? Because ultimately, just in a general sense, not in every case, but if you're a good person, most of the time, people aren't going to be coming after you. Not unless you are inhibiting someone from reaching a goal with your very presence and they're just out to get you from that fashion. So anyway, I feel like I said so much. I hope you all enjoyed these 4 chapters. I know I have, and honestly, I just want to keep reading this so badly, but we have to get finished with Stars of Chaos. So like, I'm going to do my best to try to finish that as fast as possible because this is so cute. Anyway, please let me know your thoughts in the comments section. I can't wait to read them and interact with you all. And I will see you next time. Well, Ainiman.